I've said before that much in the same way in which we were able to define truth for L simple, it is possible to define truth for much more expressive languages. Languages with much more interesting vocabularies and grammar. Now here's a thought. Since we have convinced ourselves that the term true is perfectly meaningful and unproblematic, why not add that term to the vocabulary of L simple, extend the grammatical rules accordingly, and then define truth for this extended language? After all, we do not just think that Plato is a teacher of Aristotle, and hence, by our definition of truth, that the sentence "Plato is a teacher of Aristotle" is true. We also think that, for pretty much the same reason, the sentence "Plato is a teacher of Aristotle" is true, while in everyday life and the sciences we might hardly ever be interested in a sentence like that. It is perfectly natural for a philosopher to be interested in truths about truths, for philosophers do reflect on everything really. And take the languages for which we might want to define truth to their extreme. Consider a full natural language such as English. We are of course interested in the notion of truth for English as a whole, but English does contain the term true already in its vocabulary. So a definition of truth for English as a whole should allow us to derive sentences that talk about the truth of sentences, that talk about the truth of sentences again, and the like. But there is danger just around the corner. This has been known for a long time. The ancient Greek philosophers Eubulides and Epimenides presented versions of this threat in their work. And a hint of this even found its way into a letter of St. Paul in the New Testament. Let me state the worry in my own terms. But before I do so, take a good look at this sentence, the star sentence. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by star symbol is not true. Okay? Don't think about it too much. For the moment, let me just assure you that this sentence will be the only one in this lecture 2 to be introduced by star symbol. Now consider the following argument. Premise P1. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by star symbol is identical to the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. This is simply an empirical truth. It just happens to be the case that the very sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is the sentence that starts with the sentence in lecture 2 ... and which ends with ... is not true. If things had been different, maybe the sentence in lecture 2 introduced by a star symbol would have been a different one. Maybe snow is white. But as it happens, the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is just the one mentioned by P1. The second premise of the argument is an instance of our by now very familiar truth scheme. P2. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is true, if and only if. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. Once again, we take the truth scheme and we instantiate the placeholder A by a sentence. In this case, we generate a truth equivalence for the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. P2 is plausible simply because all truth equivalences are plausible. Finally, here is the conclusion of our little argument. C. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is true, if and only if. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is not true. This conclusion is of the form A if and only if not A. But that is a logical contradiction. A sentence cannot be equivalent to its negation. For this would mean that either both sides are the case, A and not A, or neither of them is, neither A nor not A, neither of which is logically possible. At the same time, the argument from P1 and P2 to C is logically valid in the sense explained in the first lecture. For assume P1 and P2 to be true. Premise 1 entails, the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is true, if and only if the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is true. This is because logic tells us that if something is identical to something else, then one can be substituted for the other. This is a logically valid inference. According to P1, the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is identical to the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. But that means the one is true if and only if the other one is true. In other words, the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is true if and only if the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is true. Additionally, premise 2 was, the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. That sentence is true if and only if the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. Putting these two equivalences together by logical reasoning yields the contradictory conclusion of our argument. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is true, if and only if the sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true is not true. So we are facing a paradox again, in the sense encountered already in the first lecture of this course. We are confronted with a logically valid argument, the premises of which are plausible if taken by themselves, but the conclusion of which is absurd. What has gone wrong? Of course, the trouble is to do with the sentence that I diabolically showed you before I presented the paradoxical argument. The star sentence. The sentence in lecture 2 that is introduced by a star symbol is not true. This sentence, the sentence after the star symbol, is talking about itself. It says of itself that it is not true. It's like it is saying, I'm not true. And then applying to that self-referential sentence something that is completely innocent in all normal cases, namely the truth scheme and the rules of logic, leads to disaster. Call the sentence after the star symbol a liar sentence. Since talking loosely, it says of itself that it lies. Accordingly, the paradox itself is called the liar paradox in the philosophical literature.